In this segment, we're going to look at the exterior of the 56 Golden Hawk. We'll try to cover it from top to bottom. We'll talk about the fins, the little checkmark moldings, the sculpture on the doors, some of the script. We'll look at different hubcaps, placement of the parking lights, talk about the grille emblem, side grills, bumpers. The molding that runs along the bottom of the door. And we'll talk again about what a hardtop is. Talk about the differences in the side moldings from 56s and 57s and even on the different Hawks themselves. Look at the tail lights, the backup lights, in the back of the trunk here. And hopefully we'll cover all of it. I guess we should talk a little bit more about the hardtop body style. As I said in an earlier segment, there's no B-pillar on a hardtop. You have the rear quarter window and the door window and nothing in between. This body style came out around 1949. I know there was a 1949 two-door hardtop Coupe de Ville Cadillac. And initially when this body style came out, it was called a hardtop convertible. And the idea was that when you put all the windows down, it looked just like a convertible with the top up. There would be nothing in between from the C-pillar all the way up to the vent window. This body style pretty much came to an end in the middle 70s with seat belt and shoulder harness and safety regulations. Pretty much was the end of the hardtop body style. It probably faded out about the same time as the last convertible in 1976. The backup lights were used just this 1 year only, and they were only used on the Hawks and the station wagons. And the only difference is that on the station wagon, this little spacer here wasn't present. It's used on the Hawks to raise the unit above the bumper. But on the station wagon, they didn't need that. So this was just used on all the Hawk models in 1956 only. The door jamb should be painted the same color as the lower portion of the body. Of course, on a single-tone model, that would all be the same color. But on the two-tones, you would have the lighter color above the side molding, and then the door jamb and the area below the side molding would be the same color. Same holds true on the door itself. It would be painted the same color as the lower portion of the car on a two-tone model. The Studebaker script on the front fenders was introduced with Engineering Master Change Notice number 22161, which was dated February 3rd, 1956. This would put it around serial number 603-1900, and the Los Angeles equivalent would have been somewhere around 6800355. Cars before those serial numbers had no script on the fender at all. This car is serial number 6031884, just a few numbers before the 603-1900 breakdown. So that's a little bit of proof that cars prior to that did not have the Fender script. There was never Fender script on this car. The serial number on this car is 6032195. Again, after the 603-1900 breakdown that we're estimating. So we've got it narrowed down pretty well to pretty much that serial number, that area. The painted panel on the side grills should be painted the same color as the hood and the lower air intake panel. The part below the bumper here. So when you look at this car from the front, everything between this little section of the headlight, the hood, the side panels, and the lower air intake panel should all be the same color. When you come around to the side of the car, just behind the bumper here, this little piece here is a separate piece, but it should match the lower body. And that makes sense looking at the car from the side. You'd want that to be the same color. This is the correct position for the grille emblem. In order to mount this, the pin going through the grille should be located in the 5th hole down from the top and the 3rd hole from the right. And that will put it in the right spot. This is what everything looks like from the back side of the grille. You can see here 1, 2, 3 holes over, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down, and put the threaded pin through that hole and put the little plate on and the nut. This is the back side of the grille emblem and the housing. You can see the pin there, and to the left there's a little tab that sticks out. When you put this in the correct spot, you can just shove that up. That tab will shove up against the vertical bar of that hole, and then you can tighten down the nut on the other side. That's where you'd want to have that mounted. The rear bumper gravel deflectors should be painted the same color as the trunk, not the insert part, but the rest of the trunk. And the lower one should have 2 cutouts for the dual exhausts. It too should be painted the same color as the trunk. The exhaust deflector accessory AC2754 was only used during the 1956 model year. It is the correct deflector for the 56 Golden Hawk. It differs from the later model that was used from 57 through 64, which was AC2840. This would not be correct on a 56 Golden Hawk. Here's an example of the AC2754 exhaust extension for the 1956 model year. Here's a good shot of the exhaust tips, or the exhaust extensions, as used from 57 all the way up through 64. They're quite different than what we saw in the 56. Here's a nice comparison between the 2 exhaust extensions. On the left is the AC2754, the one that was used in 1956. And on the right is the AC2840 that was used from 57 on. You can see the later one is considerably larger. Accessory AC2738 is the standard wheel cover that was used on all 1956 Golden Hawks. This is the wire wheel cover, or often referred to as the Speedster wire wheel, AC2425, which was discontinued in December of 1955. It was replaced by the spoke-type wheel cover introduced in January, which we'll take a look at next. The spoke-type wheel cover, AC2799, was offered later in the model year. The spoke-type wheel cover was introduced around February 1956 as a replacement for the wire wheel cover, which was AC2425, which was no longer available. The hood used in 1956 was used for just the 1 year only. It was used on all of the Hawk models that year. And the major difference between it and the later years is this area here. Just this raised area just goes a short ways, maybe 15 or 16 inches back. And then the rest of the hood is flat. Whereas on the 57, this is a Golden Hawk. You can see that this raised area goes all the way back toward the windshield. And that was just an overlay. And below that, on the hood itself, there's a big hole cut out to accommodate the supercharger. We're looking at the underside of the hood of a 57 Golden Hawk. You can see the hole that's in the hood, and that overlay is above it. And the hole is here to accommodate the supercharger. This is the typical hood used from 57 on up to 64 with some minor variations. But the main point is this raised area here, you can see, is much different than what was on the 56 that had just a little raised area that only went sort of a semi-oval. This one goes all the way back toward the windshield, toward the back of the hood. Initially, the hood prop rod hole was way over to the passenger side of the hood. The prop hole was moved toward the center line of the hood in order to provide a better balanced support. The new hole is 8 inches to the left of the hood center line. This change occurred around April 1956 and was done by drilling a 1/2 inch diameter hole at the indicated location. The first cars affected were probably after serial number 6032539 for South Bend cars and 6800506 for cars assembled in Los Angeles. The lower air intake panel is located below the bumper area, holds the hood catch plate, and should be painted the same color as the hood and the side grills. This is AC2728, which is the typical mirror used in 1956 on the Golden Hawks. Mirrors were usually sent with the car, but not installed. Probably many dealers sold a customer a mirror from their existing stock, which may or may not have been like this one. There are 3 wide moldings which run from the rear of the front wheel well across the bottom of the door to the front of the rear wheel well. There is a right and a left side for the front and rear pieces, but the door molding is the same for either side. The molding does not mount on the rocker panel, but rather is even with the bottom edge of the door. We've talked about various paint schemes in the past, and I guess we should clear this up a little bit. There were 3 paint schemes used on the 1956 Golden Hawk. One was the single tone color. The other 2 were the early 2-tone paint scheme and then the later 2-tone paint scheme. This is a fine example of a single colored painted car. And most of the things we talk about would be not affected by a single tone color, other than this rear quarter molding. On a car with a body number less than 469, that would be a painted strip, and it would be much smaller. The second paint scheme was the early 2-tone model, where the roof and the hood and the upper portion of the lower body in front of the check mark molding were all the same color, and then the trunk and the lower part of the body below the moldings were the alternate color. And on the early paint scheme, as you can see here, that molding behind the check mark going all the way to the taillight is painted, not stainless. And on this model, the trunk insert would be painted the lighter color, the one that matches the roof. And finally, the third paint scheme was another two-tone design where the roof and the lower portion of the lower body, all below the stainless moldings, were painted the same color. And then the fins, trunk, and hood and top of the fenders were painted the accent color. And on this paint scheme, the molding behind the check mark going to the tail light is a stainless molding and a little bit larger than the painted strip on the early two-tone. And this scheme came into being with body number 469 and greater. The outer rear fender molding used on the rear quarter panel at the base of the fin and behind the check mark or V molding was painted, not stainless steel as this one is, for cars prior to body number 469. The molding was changed to stainless steel and was also larger beginning with body number 469 when the new paint scheme was introduced. I want to emphasize here that that's body number 469, not serial number 469. And since body numbers were not assigned in order, it's possible for a later serial number to have the early paint scheme and an early serial number to have the later paint scheme. And we'll have to get an example of the stainless molding to show you later on. The rear fender check mark or V molding was changed also beginning with body number 469 when the larger stainless molding was added to the rear quarter panel. The notch at the rear of the check mark molding was enlarged to fit around the new molding. This change also coincided with the new paint scheme. I have a couple of check mark moldings here. This first one is from the original up through body number 468. You can see the cutout here that we were talking about, how small it is. And then beginning with body number 469, the check mark molding became this way with a much larger cutout for the larger piece of molding. I have samples of two rear quarter moldings. The bottom one would be the one used on the later paint schemes beginning with body number 469, and the top one would be on the earlier paint schemes prior to body 469. Not sure how well that'll show up too, but there's quite a difference in the size. And this top molding would be painted the same color as the body. The front fender trim on the 56 Hawks was different than used on the 57 and 58. There's actually a left and a right side on the 56 models, and that's because of the positioning of the stainless molding. It's put on a little bit higher on the fender than on later years, so there's a slight bow from the front to the back. So there's a different part number and different strip on each side of the car. Whereas in 1957, the strip was mounted slightly lower on the fender, and that caused it to be a fairly straight item, so they're interchangeable from the left side to the right. If you take this molding and try to put it on a 56 in the correct holes, it just won't go on without bending it severely. The back window has a large molding about 3 inches wide and runs from the belt line on one side across the back of the roof to the belt line on the other side. This is called the back window upper reveal molding. Many people call this the crown molding. It was not used on any other Hawk in 1956. A similar molding was used on the 1955 Speedster, but it was mounted a little further up on the roof, and then there was another molding behind that one, similar to this type. The 57 and 58 Golden Hawks used this same molding. You can see the parking lights on the 56 Golden Hawk. They're a little different than the later years. You can see this difference here between the headlight rim and the front of the parking light. We'll take a look here at a 57, and you can really see quite a difference. It's barely an inch or so difference. The taillight housing on the 1956 Golden Hawk differs from other 1956 Hawks in that a small cutout is present on the outside edge. The cutout mates up with the outer side of the fiberglass fin. It's a little hard to see here, but it's right in here. We'll go take a look at the one on the other side. This one may show up a little better. It's right in this area. There's the tiniest little indentation right here. So there's a left side and a right side taillight housing on the 56 Golden Hawk, whereas on the other three Hawk models in 1956, they don't have the little cutout or notch there, so the taillight housings are interchangeable from side to side. The trunk, just like the hood on the 56 models, was used just the 1 year only. It's very similar to those used in later years, but the major difference is the area where the emblem and the escutcheon is, or are. There's a flattened out area all the way around this whole area, and the keyhole is a little bit lower. So this trunk was just used for the 1 year only. If we take a look at the 57, you'll see that all that's on the back end is just the keyhole, and then it's got just a little rounded flat area, and the keyhole itself, the lock, is much higher up on the trunk. And this is what was used in all the later years, except for 64. Again, that was a unique 1 year only trunk lid. Golden Hawk script was introduced with Studebaker Engineering Master Change Notice number 22257, dated April 4th, 1956. The gold script was used on some of the South Bend cars produced later in the model year. Some were around serial number 6032710. All Los Angeles assembled cars appear to have been fitted with the chrome trunk script. If any Los Angeles cars were fitted with the gold trunk script, it probably occurred on or after serial number 6800519. The wheels on 1956 Golden Hawks were painted the same color as the body color. The body color being the color that was below the side trim. There were 4 two-tone models where white was the body color and the dark color would be the accent color. So in those cases, the wheel would be painted white, but that still follows the same formula as matching the body color. One area we haven't really talked about is this area right below the drip molding. It runs all the way from the windshield around past the rear quarter window and down to the lower part of the body. That should be painted the same color as the roof. All 1956 Golden Hawks came with stainless steel wheel well moldings. None of them are interchangeable, so it takes 4 to complete the set. The front bumper on the 56 Hawks are all the same, and they're also the same as were used on the sedans that year. The rear bumper, on the other hand, was used only on the Hawks, and they were the same through the entire Hawk line. The bumper bolts are all these oblong-shaped ones all the way around. The front and the back bumpers all use the same bolt. The round bolt that was introduced later for some cars was not used on the 56 Golden Hawks. The 56 Golden Hawk was the only Hawk model to carry fins that year. They were made out of fiberglass and they extended straight up. They were rather modest in design and quite a bit different from what was used in 57. Again, we'll look at a Golden Hawk. You can see that the fin is canted out to the side, and it was made of steel rather than fiberglass. And all the Hawk models, both the Silver Hawk and the Golden Hawk in 57 and 8 on up to 61, had this type of fin.